The first blast hit like a hammer, lifting roofs and blowing out windows for blocks. On a mild Saturday afternoon in May 2000, people in the Dutch city of Enschede stepped outside, confused, looking toward the Roombeek neighborhood. A column of dark smoke rose from behind rows of small brick houses and workshops, where SE Fireworks kept its depot. Sparks shot into the air. Neighbors drifted closer, not knowing that the real explosion had not happened yet. At 3:03 p.m. on May 13th, a neighbor called the Enschede Fire Brigade to report smoke and crackling sounds at SE Fireworks on Tollenstraat. The company supplied fireworks for concerts and festivals and had recently passed inspections. At 3:08 p.m., a crew of 12 firefighters arrived and began unrolling hoses toward a central workshop labeled C2. What they could not see from the street was how much explosive material was packed onto the site. Permits allowed far less than what was stored there. Investigators would later estimate roughly 177 tons of fireworks on the property. Some were in reinforced bunkers, but large quantities of powerful display shells sat in ordinary shipping containers pushed close together. Internal fire doors meant to compartmentalize the complex were sometimes left open. On paper, there were multiple safety barriers. In reality, the depot was ready for a chain reaction. The initial fire seemed small. Flames burned inside a work area where about 900 kilograms of fireworks were stored. Some items began to cook off, shooting sparks and small rockets through cracks and gaps. The firefighters recognized that pyrotechnics were involved and requested more units, but they stayed close to the flames, working as they would at any warehouse blaze. Police officers set up a cordon, but the perimeter stayed tight. Residents watched from sidewalks, balconies, and upstairs windows, some filming with camcorders. Shortly after 3:30 p.m., one of the outdoor containers exploded. Witnesses saw a blinding flash and a dense cloud of debris drive upward. The blast, comparable to hundreds of kilograms of TNT, slammed into the surrounding streets. Glass shattered. People were knocked down. Firefighters near the depot were thrown off their feet, and vehicles were damaged. Radio traffic filled with fragmented calls about an explosion, injuries, and flames everywhere. Moments later came the main blast. A second, much more powerful explosion ripped through the depot with the force of several thousand kilograms of TNT. A huge fireball rose above Enschede, and a shockwave spread across the city, rattling windows far beyond Roombeek. Rows of houses and workshops facing the depot simply disappeared. Walls collapsed inward, roofs launched into the air, and heavy debris rained down onto neighboring streets. 4 firefighters who had been working close to the buildings were killed instantly. People standing at windows or outside their homes were buried under falling brick and timber. Where the central part of the depot had stood, a wide crater opened in the ground. Around it, entire blocks were burning. The blast had blown open gas lines and hurled cars onto sidewalks. Fireworks continued to ignite in scattered stockpiles, sending random bursts of flame into the ruins and making it dangerous to move freely. Survivors stumbled through smoke and dust, some calling for relatives, others too stunned to speak. Those who could walk tried to move the injured toward safer streets. Emergency managers widened the evacuation zone. It was clear the disaster extended far beyond one industrial plot. Ultimately, around 10,000 people were ordered out of the area. Roads jammed as residents tried to leave in cars or on foot, some carrying pets or a single bag grabbed from a damaged home. Others had nothing but the clothes they were wearing. Temporary shelters opened in schools and sports halls across Enschede. Fire brigades from across the region converged on the city. They faced fires burning across roughly 40 hectares. About 400 homes were completely destroyed. Around 1,500 buildings were damaged, some with their interiors exposed, others left standing but unsafe. By late evening, The largest fires were under control, but smaller blazes and hot spots continued into the next day. Hospitals activated mass casualty plans. Ambulances and private cars delivered people cut by glass, burned by the fireball, or injured by blast pressure and debris. In all, about 950 people were hurt. Some needed intensive care, others were treated for minor wounds and shock. 23 people would die as a result of the disaster, including the 4 firefighters and residents who had lived closest to the depot. Once the site cooled, investigators moved in. They examined the crater, the remains of bunkers and containers, and the spread of damage across Roombeek. The picture that emerged was of a depot where storage had quietly expanded far beyond what had been licensed, while the city around it became more densely populated. The factory had been built in 1977, when the district still had more industrial use. Over the years, new housing moved closer. Complaints and inspection reports signaled problems, but the depot stayed. Police also explored whether the fire had been deliberately set. A suspect was tried and initially convicted of arson, but on appeal he was acquitted for lack of solid evidence. In the end, the official inquiry left the ignition source uncertain and focused on design flaws, storage violations, and weak oversight that let a small fire grow beyond anyone's control. For the company's managers, the criminal consequences were limited. 2 owners were convicted of breaking environmental and safety laws and of handling illegal fireworks. After appeals, they served 12-month prison sentences and paid fines. Many survivors and relatives of the dead felt that no court ruling could match the loss of their homes and families. The human impact of the blast unfolded slowly. More than 1,200 people were left homeless. Some lived for months in temporary housing, while authorities decided how to rebuild. Doctors later reported higher rates of psychological problems and stress-related complaints among those who had lived in the blast zone. Nightmares, anxiety, and sudden reactions to loud noises remained common long after the ruins were cleared. Reconstruction of Roombeek became a national project. City planners worked with residents to design a new neighborhood on the scarred ground, mixing housing with cultural buildings and public spaces. At the former depot site, a memorial called The Vanished House Between Heaven and Earth was built, using the crushed floor of the storage building in the crater left by the explosion. Each year on May 13th, bells ring in Enschede just before 3:30 p.m. to mark the moment when the main blast tore through the district. Across the Netherlands, the disaster led to tighter fireworks rules. Storage requirements were strengthened, inspections became more detailed, and authorities shut down illegal depots. Local governments were pushed to keep hazardous facilities away from densely populated neighborhoods. For safety experts, the Enschede case became a cautionary example of how real conditions can drift far from what permits describe. What happened in Roombeek started with what looked like a routine warehouse fire and a factory that seemed to be under control. It ended with a crater in the middle of a neighborhood, 23 dead, nearly 1,000 injured, and thousands more displaced. The Enschede fireworks explosion showed how quickly an ordinary afternoon can turn into a disaster when dangerous materials are hidden in plain sight, and the systems meant to manage them fail. Thank you for listening to Road to Ruins. Subscribe for more true stories where systems fail and people pay the price.